Hello and welcome to Merlin Reviews. Today we shall be discussing the integral relationship between two Marvel icons, Professor Xavier, leader of the X-Men, and Magneto, their greatest enemy. On the most basic level, these two men represent two different but closely linked ideologies. Xavier was born into privilege, but had seen his fair share of evil, and chose to take on lost souls, of which his team of mutants is mostly comprised. He trains them to control their powers and use them to benefit society, even when they suffered prejudice from the majority of the world. Magneto had a much more dire upbringing than Xavier, being born into a gypsy family during World War II. Erik Lensherr saw firsthand the ultimate finality of persecution, mass genocide. He lost his family and many of his people long before his mutant abilities surfaced. Upon seeing mutants persecuted in the same manner, Magneto formed the terrorist group, the Brotherhood of Mutants, originally evil mutants actually, to topple governments and usher in a new age of mutant equality, and more so, mutant superiority. In this sense, it could be stated that Xavier's idealistic viewpoints may have been reinforced by a childhood that was relatively tame by comparison. Though he did suffer abuse from his stepbrother Cain Marko, who would become the villain Juggernaut, fought in a war, and suffered from a disability, specifically the loss of his legs, he had never suffered anywhere near as much as Magneto. While this makes his intentions very noble, Magneto is usually seen as the more interesting character. Both men, being created during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, are stand-ins for two major civil rights leaders. Xavier could be seen as a representation of the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. While King preached nonviolence, which the X-Men obviously don't completely subscribe to, they still follow the idea of forgiveness and continue to fight for their beliefs. In their case, they protect the people that persecute them to prove themselves as equals. Magneto obviously is a stand-in for Malcolm X, who preached violent responses and whose tactics bordered on the terroristic. Both men still wished to liberate their people, and their views often conflicted with one another. Much can also be said of the same of Professor X and Magneto. What's interesting about Magneto's case is that instead of bettering himself after experiencing such persecution at a young age, he emulated the practices of the Nazis. This path is much easier to follow rather than Xavier's, which requires self-discipline and personal control. Magneto is driven by his emotions, while Xavier does his best to suppress them and look at things logically. There's kind of a Sith versus Jedi perspective here. Despite their conflicts, both men have proven that they still have great respect for one another. Both of them have also done their fair share of questionable acts for their causes. Magneto especially is hard to pin down, as his goals range from simple equality for mutants to mass genocide. This may be fluctuations in the writers over the years, but it also could reflect a very conflicted soul. Magneto may not be the most dangerous or evil of the X-Men's rogues gallery. That honor could probably be bestowed on the likes of Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, or Strife. Still, his relationship with Xavier makes their conflicts far more personal. What makes the conflict so fascinating for readers is how they represent the conflict and struggle that so many have had to endure and two obvious paths set before us in times of persecution. History tells us that there are many ways to achieve social change for the better. While the works of Thoreau, Gandhi, and King have proven to bring about such change and show the best of humanity, one must wonder if such a technique would have been as successful against fascist Germany. In truth, both men may have a point. Certain situations may require different actions. Thankfully, our nation, much like X-Men comics, is becoming far more accepting of all different types of people. But it doesn't mean the struggle is over. Far from it. Until the day when all conflict has been extinguished from this world, we will always have our Charles Xaviers and our Erik Lensherrs. Well, those are my thoughts on Professor X and Magneto. Please share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, requests are welcome. Until next time, stay magical, my friends.